life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brooke Ashley.
And I'm Justin Boland.
And tonight, post-election season, we wanted to once again talk about, I guess, the divided states of America. There is a...
Wow.
Yeah, you like that? I think I stole it from a show or a movie title or something. But there is a poll that UVA Center for Politics released earlier in October, and it's basically like Democrat-Republican voter poll, and it shows how divided we are. And I guess for the context of this discussion, I wanted to go through all of the stats in this poll, and that'll give us some meat to chew on, I guess. All right, so starting off...
So do we have to wait till you read them all, or can we discuss them individually if we want to?
Up to you all. What do you want to do?
Okay.
Let's go through it a little bit at a time. That may work better instead of... well, how many stats are there? Is there a bunch?
Okay, so there's like two tables, and in each table there's about... there's probably 15 total. 15 total.
Yeah,
stats.
we better discuss them as they come, because honestly,
Yeah.
by the time you get
I'll
to
forget
15, I'm gonna forget what one was.
Okay.
That's where I was going with how many.
Okay.
Because I can't keep up with that many things.
Yep. All right. So here, the first stat is, I have come to view elected officials from the opposing party as presenting a clear and present danger to American democracy. 80% of Biden voters agree with that. 84% of Trump supporters agree with that. Okay.
Yeah.
So are they talking any elected official from the other party?
That's how it's worded. Yes.
I have to think that people had a specific person in mind when they said
I
that.
think for the most part, at least when I see stuff like this, what I have in mind is congressional. You know, I always think of Congress because to me they're the most divided, people on earth.
I think most people think presidential.
I definitely think people have national leaders in
Right.
mind at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it's more local, it's probably not as divisive, but I think it's getting there. I think eventually it will get there. Okay, so that's the first stat. The next one is concern that you or someone close to you might experience personal loss or suffering due to the effects of the opposing party's policies in the future. Biden voters, 80% agree with that. Trump voters, 82% agree with that. So again, very, very high.
Is there any of these that are not like right at this 80%? Because I just wonder.
Yes, there is one. There is one, and we will get to it toward the end. And I was surprised actually by this. Okay, so the next one is, despite the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment protection of free speech, the media sources on the extreme left and right have become so untruthful that they should be censored to stop spreading of dangerous lies. 78% of Biden voters agree with that. 73% of Trump voters agree with that.
The funny thing is, too, you can see this play out a lot when you watch Congress talk about big tech. You have like some very far left people that's like, we got to delete
Yep.
Facebook, that we got to manage them. And then you have people on the far right that are like, talking about how they're silencing conservatives on social media and this stuff, and they need to be regulated to force people to give equal airtime and stuff. So like both of them are absolutely pushing for laws against it, and they have totally different things
Right.
in mind.
It seems like neither the far left and the far right, neither one really cares that much for the First Amendment.
Or they have differing opinions, maybe, of what
They only care about what affects them in their
Mm.
party. I think that's the case. Okay, so the next one is Republicans or Democrats want to eliminate the influence of progressive or traditional values in American life and culture. 78% of Biden voters agree with that statement. 87% of Trump voters agree with that statement.
So that is a very confusing.
I'm still processing the question.
Okay,
thing.
so the a way to process this is Republicans want to eliminate the influence of progressive values in American life and culture.
That was asked to Biden
who?
supporters.
That was asked to Biden
Okay,
supporters.
okay.
And then the flip side was Democrats want to eliminate the influence of traditional values in American life and culture. That was asked to Trump supporters.
Yeah.
So the 78% of Biden supporters agree with that. 87% of Trump supporters agree with that. Okay. Moving on to the next one. The conservative media might as well be a wing of the Republican Party. And on the flip side, the mainstream media might as well be a wing of the Democratic Party. 77% of Biden supporters agree with that. 88% of Trump supporters agree with that.
Say that one again.
Okay. The conservative media might as well be a part of the Republican Party.
So conservative.
Conservative media.
So did they say who they thought conservative was?
I mean, it's going to be Fox News and
Everybody's
Newsmax
Fox,
and
yeah.
anything, on that side. And then mainstream media, which would be your MSNBC, CNN, might as well be a part of the Democratic Party. It's just saying that it's like it's balled out,
Right.
It's just a wing of it. It's 77% and 88% respectively. So again, like these are astronomically high numbers.
So I don't know. That's the first one that I've been like, yeah, okay. I can kind of see that.
Yeah, and I think that one especially seems like it's definitely worded to hit the right sweet spots for people.
Right.
Mhm.
Like it uses mainstream media when you ask the conservatives,
Mhm.
and it uses the conservative media, obviously alluding towards, like you said, Fox News is what it's going to have in mind. So,
I mean, and when you think of specific instances, so I think the two specific ones that's in my mind is Fox News and MSNBC. When you talk about those two, I think there's no denying that they are influenced heavily by the party that they support. Now,
it's party line.
CNN is left leaning, I feel like, but I don't think it's as unbalanced as what everybody thinks it is. Like I watch CNN more than probably any other news outlet, and I don't see it as left leaning as MSNBC, but it seems like everybody equates it, and I think it's simply because they were more of the harsh critics of Trump throughout his entire presidency.
There's probably some of that, yeah. I know there's definitely like Jake Tapper, you can't argue that he's kind of some left-wing maniac because he's
Right.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
So do you think that part of this question, part of the high numbers is we have as a society started saying if you say something I disagree with, it can't be true. So we automatically just say, well, they're in so-and-so's pocket instead of being critical thinkers of whatever position we are or whatever political person we align with. We just say, you're not telling the truth.
Right.
Like
we're easy to dismiss any kind of, merit to the news when we don't agree with it because we just don't agree on facts anymore.
Right. What is a fact?
I think a lot of this too can be tied back to the last question because I think a lot of people see problems with social media and things like that. But with mainstream media, you kind of watch your own bubble. Like if somebody's a hardcore conservative, they're not sitting around watching MSNBC all day.
Yeah.
Instead, they'll see clips from MSNBC that's posted on Twitter and be like, look at this crazy thing that so-and-so said that one day. And vice versa, the same. You see, you don't, if you're a strong progressive, you're not going to sit around and watch Fox News. Like, why would you? But you'll sit there and watch a clip that somebody you follow on Twitter posted that shows this crazy thing that they said today. So, I think a lot of these go towards, we get in our own little bubbles. and we don't interact with them, and we have this preconceived notion of what's going on in this other bubble, and that other one's like a total danger to our society, and everything that possibly can be bad about them, I believe it.
Right. Yeah, and I think, I mean, we have to own up to, like, we want to blame the media, we want to blame the political elites, quote unquote, but we have to own up to our own part in this. Like, I think we as a society are apt to want to listen to the things that we've already perceived as the truth. We want to stay in that bubble. We're comfortable there. And like, if we didn't want that, then watch NBC Nightly News or CBS News, because you're not going to get any kind of leanings in those, but they're boring, right? And that's the case.
30 minutes,
I mean,
just the news.
Yeah, it's just the news. We love opinions.
Yeah.
When they agree
I mean,
with us.
it's a natural human thing too. Like, people want to be around people that you agree with. That's who you kind of usually get along best with. But it seems like it's accelerated and been taken to extremes in recent years, both with, like, there's a lot of the theory about the big sort stuff, to where you move to cities that you agree with politically, or you agree with things like that. So you get, people moving to Asheville, or if you're from around here and you lean left, you want to move somewhere that aligns with you. And other people like moving to Texas if they're in California because they don't agree with the politics there. Like, people sort themselves into their own little communities, and we always have. But that's where I think social media really comes in, because you can find anybody that agrees with you and make your own little bubble without even having to move. It's not healthy.
Yeah, I think the moving for political reasons, I think probably has been really exacerbated in the last couple cycles, because, I mean, it used to be people disagreed. I mean, I can think of in my own family, people lined up, who was red, who was blue. You had conversations. You may even have a heated debate, but it wasn't as animosity driven as it is now. I mean, it's downright ugly. I mean, neighbors would put opposing signs up. If you put 2 signs for your party and somebody disagreed, they put 2 signs of theirs, whatever. Now you've got people destroying stuff and calling each other names. And I mean, I could see
you're basically living with a neighbor that you hate.
Yeah. And I could see if you lived in an area that leaned really hard one direction and you were another direction really hard, I could see why you wouldn't want to stay there.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that too.
We've seen it in our own area.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen people villainized and ostracized because they had a differing political view, no matter the impact they were having on the community, for good or bad. I mean,
I will say that part of my journey away from considering myself an evangelical and changing denominations is absolutely politics. Even though we've talked about how you shouldn't allow politics to influence or dictate your Christian beliefs. What was happening with me is that, I've felt that I was a Christian. I was a practicing Christian, and the beliefs that I come to based on the biblical interpretations that I've read have me viewing things in a progressive light. And I am being villainized, not directly. People isn't directly saying, Justin, you're terrible, you're not a Christian, blah, blah, blah. But indirectly, people I'm going to church with is indirectly saying, you cannot have these views and be a Christian. And that led me to wanting to find a church that accepts views that I felt was Christian views and would accept me as is and not force me to be on the conservative spectrum, because I'm just not. I haven't been in a very long time. And that it changed me, and now I'm Episcopalian. So it did lead me down that road. And so I don't know. Like, I don't know if that should have been the reason why. I mean, it's not the only reason why. There was other reasons. The whole science thing, that was always a sticking point with me. So that led me to wanting a different flavor of Christianity too. But the politics was a huge thing that led me down to into another denomination. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Most Republicans no longer believe the ideas that make America great, and most Democrats no longer believe in the ideas that make America great. 72% of Biden voters support that statement. 87% of Trump voters support that statement.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's significant. That's a significant difference.
It's a pretty big difference. Yeah.
So I would be curious, like I find myself wanting to ask follow-up questions to these.
No.
So what so what values do you think make America great? Like, because I think we hear all these statistics and we're like, yeah, we're so divided, which furthers the division instead of bridging the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we're so focused on how divided are we that I don't feel like anybody's asking the questions that could bring us back together. And the reason I say that is, working in conflict resolution, one of the things that I realized a lot of times is people want the same thing. They're just talking about two different things. They call it two different things. And so you're talking past one another instead of talking to
Right.
one another. So I would love to know, well, what do Biden supporters, what values do they think make America great?
Yeah.
And what values do Trump supporters put in that same category?
So there actually is another table, and I skipped this one because it actually goes through some specific issues to Biden and Trump supporters on if they support these issues. So I think that would answer some of your questions. So let me just go through a few of these.
Not to be a conspiracy theorist, but I've done enough with statistics to know I can make them say just about whatever I want them to say, depending on how I ask the question.
So here is one of them: making community college free for all Americans. 84% of Biden supporters agree with that. 43% of Trump supporters agree with that.
But see, that's a fiscal management thing. That is the basis of the difference in the political parties, or what used to be, so I would expect that. I mean, your conservatives are saying, well, somebody's got to pay the instructors. Mm-hmm. Somebody's got to pay for the buildings. Where's that money coming from? I mean, so I don't think that you can't take that statistic and say, well, 43% of people don't think community college is important. Right. I mean, you have to say, where's the funding coming from, I think.
Yeah. So there's another one here: legislation supporting unions through banning right to work laws. 78% of Biden supporters support that. 42% of Trump supporters support that. Again, that's a part of that. That's what you're going to see. All of these are really what you're going to see with conservative versus
for years,
liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, generations. But that still doesn't get to.
It's interesting, though, they never mention in this poll, they never mention national security. And I feel like that is the huge one that would differ of what national security is, because you're probably going to have a lot of, building walls, stopping illegal immigration and stuff on the conservative side, and you're not going to have that on the liberal side. But they didn't even ask that question. Like, that is not a question they asked.
I think it's interesting. And you want to talk about media bias, because I feel like I can speak from this from a personal point of view about border security, because I happen to have family members that are actually involved in border security. What we see on the news is not what is happening at the border from firsthand accounts. And it is very slanted. And it's slanted both ways. Like, the truth is just not being told. It is a rallying cry to get people all riled up.
So you think that it's a voting issue for both sides?
I think it's a voting issue for both sides.
I've thought that. I've thought that too. Like, I think there's certain issues that neither side's ever going to tackle. It's always going to be an issue because they need it to be an issue. I think immigration's one of them, and I think abortion's the other one.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. These are two flags that we can just stick in the ground, and it draws people to them. And we're never going to, I mean, I just go back to Bush W had a great comprehensive immigration bill. Wonderful. Like all these things that we talk about now were addressed in that, but we couldn't get it to the table. Neither side wanted to put it to the table. Well, why? Because
you don't want to let the other party get a win,
right.
and that's still going on. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's worse now than what it was under the Bush, but yeah, you can't let the other side get a win, and it's
So that's kinda-
that is killing our country. that's something politics is doing that's killing us.
Are we getting more divided still? Is it still increasing? Are we heading in that direction type thing? Is there a way that those numbers go back together? And I guess kind of a similar question is, have we been this divided before?
Well, let me finish the polls because it talks more about that. Okay. So the next one is, there is no real difference between Republicans and fascists and Democrats and socialists. Okay. This is one that actually surprised me. Okay. Only 56% of Biden supporters agreed with that statement. I thought that was low compared to what I've been hearing. And 76% of Trump supporters agree with that statement, which I felt that's probably right on from where I thought it would be. Maybe even lower than what I thought it would be. So, yeah, that's something. And then the next one, would you consider voting for any opposing party candidate? Wait, would consider voting for any opposing party candidate as being disloyal to the people I care about? So if you voted for the opposite party, do I consider you disloyal to my people? I think is the way it's very confusing the way that's worded. And here is another one that surprised me, because only 52% of Biden supporters agreed with that statement. Only 54% of Trump supporters agreed with that statement. Maybe because they didn't understand what it meant.
That's what I was about to ask. Did like one quarter of the people just not understand what was being asked?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is like an undergrad project that undergrads have come up with, and they're getting a grade on it. And that question would have gotten an F.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay. So here is some more divisive, I guess, worded questions or polls. If our society so wants, it is the duty of every true citizen to help eliminate the evil that poisons our country from within. So this is probably cancel culture related. 63% of Biden supporters agree with that. 78% of Trump supporters agree with that.
that is a baited question.
Mm-hmm. It is.
UVA should be ashamed of themselves for these questions.
Okay. So the next one, our country needs a powerful leader in order to destroy the radical and immoral currents prevailing in society. 62% of Biden supporters agree with that. 82% of Trump supporters agree with that.
Which is funny because you know what people meant by that question.
Exactly. That one was definitely a one-sided question, in my opinion.
Although
to prove that one side's going to agree with that.
There are a lot of people who think Biden is Satan incarnate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it's a lot of that 82% that I just mentioned.
Yes.
That agree with that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that any Democrat that is in office, you're going to get that. Like I've heard it for the last at least decade since I've been paying attention that so-and-so who happens to always be Democrat is either Satan or the Antichrist or something a bit equivalent.
I'm older than y'all. We have established that many times on this podcast. And I really don't remember this level of vitriol or name calling happening until Barack Obama was elected.
It goes along with the implementation of social media too. Like it's hand in hand. I think it's why it got worse. I feel like it's always been there. There's always been this underhanded name calling, but it's always been in back doors. It's not out in the open. It's not. But now that social media is a thing and everything's out in the open, that has just increased our divisiveness.
I definitely remember like a bunch of weird attacks during Clinton's time about like conspiracy theory stuff with him and all these things that potentially, you know, they have people killed or whatever. And the same under Bush, you know, there was the Bush did 9/11 current and stuff like that definitely appeared. But yeah, it seems like it was during Obama's presidency that it really kind of turned up to 11 type thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the first time I remember somebody saying this person's of the devil or
Uh-huh.
this person's evil. I mean, this person's lost their mind. They must have had a stroke. They're a puppet for, I mean, that kind of stuff's been said for years about people, but evil,
Mhm.
that's a whole different level.
And for me, from my standpoint, I was hearing it so much from one side, from the right wing side, because it's what I was surrounded
But
by.
that's the area we're in. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
It's
Like,
the area we're in.
there's
So I was
a-
hearing it so much from, you know, family members, friends, people that I went to church with, that it's put such a just a bad taste in my mouth that it definitely, number one, I never considered myself liberal. I never called myself that. But once it started getting heated, once it started, you know, getting more and more, oh, well, the liberals are doing this, I started embracing the label. I started calling myself liberal because I kind of wanted to just be like, I'm going to stick it back
Rebel.
to you a little bit, right? And that's part of the issue is, you know,
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, the ugliness, that whatever I see being ugly, I want to be the opposite of.
and that's the
So,
Christian way. It really
so
is.
when I see whatever political persuasion somebody is, if you're being nasty and full of vitriol and
Mhm.
attacking somebody, I don't want to have anything to do with you. So I am not going to align myself with your party.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah,
You
and,
know,
and that's where I'm struggling with now, is because that was all in the past decade. That was just always coming from one side, from where I
Mhm.
was where I was sitting. Now I'm seeing it from the left, towards Trump supporters, towards conservatives in general. Not even Trump supporters, just conservatives in general. And it's getting sickening. So I don't know where to go at this point. Like
well, I mean, and here's the thing. I think, for so long, whatever political party we've been aligned to, we've wanted to say that was the political party that Jesus represents or
Right.
God would be a part of. And I think we've forgotten that Christianity is really about being countercultural.
Right.
Whatever,
Mhm.
Right.
you know,
It would be
like,
counterparty to both parties.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think people forget that even in Jesus's time, there were great political forces at
Yes.
work. I
Much
mean, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. I mean, you
the
had,
Romans.
yes, you had the Zealots, you had
Yeah.
all these people.
Yeah.
So, and all these different political persuasions. And so a lot of the arguing that we see in the New Testament is really people trying to test the waters to see where Jesus lines up politically,
Yeah.
you
I-
know?
And I don't hear I guess the Jesus language from the left. I don't hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, Jesus would be completely aligned with our party." They seem to not
I have
care.
definitely heard Jesus
Have you
was
heard-
a socialist.
Yes.
I have heard that. Yeah, you're right. But I guess in more of the embrace from the political, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just the backdrop of the political party. I don't know the last time that the Democratic side has tried to be a Christian party. It seems almost counter to what the Democratic Party has done.
No, but I do hear people who profess to be Christians who are staunchly Democrats saying, I can't see how
Right.
a true I mean, so
That has crossed my mind many times too. So I'm not going to deny that I haven't thought that as well.
yeah.
So the temptation is there to do it. The problem is that when you feel like you've been mistreated by one side, then once you get power, the temptation's there. The eye for an eye thing. We want to go back to that, And sure, you can look up some Old Testament references and say I'm following the Bible here. Well, you're not following Jesus, because he absolutely said not eye for eye. We need to turn the other cheek to our enemy, and we completely ignore that. So I'm having a hard
And I think
time.
we have a hard time judging what's an eye for an eye, because when somebody hits, like if somebody hits somebody on my team or one of my friends, somebody I feel close to, it feels a lot worse to me.
Yeah.
And so like when I retaliate, I'm probably going to retaliate, not an eye for an eye, but I'm
It's
going to
maybe
take
worse.
your eye for, you scratched me or
Yeah.
something like that, to
Yeah.
keep the analogy going. But
So I also hear
we keep
people
escalating it.
when we're talking about political things and you bring up, love your enemies or whatever, and they'll say, but Jesus also overturned the tables.
Oh yeah.
There was righteous anger.
The one aggressive thing he ever did, really, and that is the proof.
And
Proof's
I
in
mean,
the
I
pudding.
think we have to remember there was a reason. I mean, it wasn't like he just went into a farmer's market and
Right.
got mad because people were selling their peppers and
It was the
tomatoes
temple.
and he flipped them around. He got mad because people were profiting on people trying to get closer to God, and that they were standing in their way of forgiveness and all those kind of things. He wasn't mad because they were selling a dove. They were mad because they marked them up so much. So like my thing would be, he'd get mad if you go into Disney World and they charge you an arm and a leg for a bottle of water when you're going to die of dehydration if you don't have it, right? Like that's different than saying you can't sell anything ever. Or
what's interesting to me is the times that Jesus did get mad, and flipping the
that
table
we know of
that's been written, the flipping the table, and even the harsh name calling.
Mhm.
It's been religious leaders who are keeping people from coming closer to God.
Yeah,
and that's when he gets mad.
Listen, his harshest criticisms across the board, he didn't delve into the Roman politics or whether, in fact, he said, I'm out of this.
Explicitly,
right?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not going to weigh into this. But man, he took the church leaders to task.
He sure did.
I mean,
and I think that goes to show you where his priorities were and what the kingdom of God is and what the kingdom of God's priorities is. He could have easily rebuked the Romans for their horrible practices. He even said that one of the Roman soldiers, he blessed them for their faith, right? For having a strong faith. Like, if that doesn't tell you something, then I don't know what would, and that's where I keep coming back to. It's like, if Jesus wasn't going to go there, and he was actually going to lay down his life and allow the evil Roman Empire to be the one to take his life, then who are we? Who are we to always want power?
I love the fact that he looks to the woman at the well and after she has expressed surprise and gratitude for the grace that he's showing her, he says, go and sin no more. He doesn't say to her, oh, I will tell you more if you promise me to go and sin no more. Like, or you go sin no more and then come back to me. Right.
Yep.
I mean, he says, your faith, whatever, now go and sin no more.
Right.
We've got it backwards as the American church. We're like, go get your crap together.
Yep.
And go look like us and talk like us and know when to stand up, sit down, and all that kind of stuff. Then come back to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got me on my soapbox. We're totally off politics.
Bowling, are you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I like your point about Jesus criticizing, religious leaders the most, because I think that is the same type of energy people are putting into politics today, because I think we're kind of making politics a religion for a secular religion for a lot of people. And so to me, I feel like that's got to be a source of a lot of this grief and increasing anxiety towards, people you disagree with, because this is kind of your for a lot of people, it's your main purpose in life type thing is this is what your focus is on. And like, to me, I feel like there has to be, it's not a coincidence that the rise in a lot of our political divisions has came at the same time that, we see decreases in church engagement and attendance and across the board. People are going to fill that hole with something. You have to have something that gives you meaning in life. And if it's not going to be religion, people are very quickly going to gravitate to politics. And, when you're talking about disagreement on the fundamental purpose of life, things are going to get heated.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate to see that the American church is coerced into this as well. It's not, it's not just people who don't believe. It's people who believe who are hook, line, and sinker into this mind frame. And it's just very disappointing.
I think it's so disappointing to hear believers say things like Trump or Biden or whoever is going to save us. They're going to be our savior. They're going to save our country. They're going to save my pension. They're going to say, I'm like, hello, I was with you Sunday morning when you possessed Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And now you're saying this political person needs to come back, or this political person's going to save us all.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
It's the mindset that people use to like make compromises and justify their compromises and how they act towards your neighbor. Because like a lot of people will say, like niceness doesn't work because the other par's so bad. We've tried being nice and it just doesn't work. So I'm not going to be nice to Democrats anymore because, we ain't going to win if we're nice. But that's missing the point, because you're treating politics as itself being the end game at that point. That's not, we're called to be, images of Christ in this world. And that is our main purpose, So like if we're compromising on that for another goal, that's making a false idol, like the literal definition of that. We're putting something above what we are called to be if we are saying, compromising on being the way a Christian should be is worth it because it gets us to our end goal. And I don't even think it gets you to the end goal. I think that's a bad argument. I don't think it works practically that way.
No, I don't either. Like if you continue with eye for an eye, then eventually it has to lead to war. There's just no way around it. Like
it's just going to escalate.
It's going to escalate. There's never going to be peace, and eventually it has to lead to war. Okay, so there's 2 questions left, so let's go ahead and hit these. The one is, it would be better for America if whoever is president could take actions without being constrained by Congress and courts. So that's dictatorship.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Ooh.
And this one will surprise you. Biden supporters 46%, Trump supporters 44%.
Do these people not understand what they're talking about here? I mean, are these the same?
I feel like this one went down a lot, and I think it probably was close enough that some people were like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that's can't do that."
Right? Yeah, I can't go that far.
Yeah, and I think it's because they see now. They have a specific president in mind when they're answering this question. So it might be Obama or it might be Trump, and we're like, no, we can't give this person unfettered power. We just can't do it. So I think that's probably why it was so low. Here's the question that really. So the Holy Post podcast, they went over this question, and it stemmed a whole conversation between Sky and David French. And actually, this question was on the Late Night with Bill Maher, and it's a rare thing that I can watch his show without getting annoyed somehow. But I completely agreed with him on this. And so the question is, the situation in America is such that I would favor red and blue states seceding from the Union to form their own countries. 41% of Biden voters agree with that. 52% of Trump supporters agree with that. And that is higher than what it should be on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a article in the Dispatch today talking about that specific question. I didn't mention any of the other ones that you had.
Yeah.
And I liked his description of it. He was saying like he had been helping with like foreign governments, trying to create stability in there, and that's what he had worked in for the past 20 years. And he's like, to him, this seems like such a first world problem type thing. Mm-hmm. When you look at like civil wars, and it's even like somehow if it was peaceful, which is a blue elephant type thing, blue unicorn, you don't see that very often. But if somehow it was a peaceful secession, like you're talking about something that's 100% a first world problem, because we're looking at thinking we need to secede because we don't agree with somebody. It's not that people are outright like rounding people into camps like you see in China, where people are, Uyghurs are being killed,
or
there.
Slavery.
Yeah. We're not talking about slavery. We're talking about, we don't agree on like what in the grand scheme of things is minor policies.
We seem like a bunch of spoiled Americans.
Yeah. And like the end result of that is a situation to where if you do believe that these are important issues and people are going to lose rights over them and things like that, you're creating a country to where you're leaving those people to be, oppressed even more because there's no check on them there. So if you do believe these are important issues enough to separate, like, it's not going to be good for the people in the country that's created. And that's not even talking about the foreign loss of influence that we would have, the loss of American influence in the foreign, sphere would lead to a lot of destabilization everywhere.
How would the military work
insane.
then?
Insane.
And it just doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no way we could ever succeed in seceding.
Oh, wow.
How'd you like that?
Oh, bada bing, bada boom.
That's right. It's just, these stats are disappointing. I was looking forward to giving you all the bad news tonight.
I bet you were. Well, one question I did want to ask, and you never did answer it. You told me to listen to the other stats, and it wasn't answered.
Oh, sorry. What is it?
Is if we've ever been this divided before. I mean, obviously at the Civil War, that's pretty obvious because it literally was. But the one that comes to mind for me, and none of us were like alive during the main part of it, would be like the 60s. I mean, this was a pretty tumultuous time in American politics when we have literal people being executed in public all the time. You have riots at like the Democratic Convention. There was a huge riot. You have Vietnam War protests. You have all these things kind of spiraling together. I kind of wonder if you ask somebody who was in their 30s and 40s during that time, kind of our age then, like what that time felt like compared to now. Because I've seen people talk about that before, and some people will say like, "Oh, it felt much worse then," but then they're like, "Oh, but I was a teenager, and so everything was bigger to me then because that was all that mattered." But I do wonder about that, and I wonder if there's any lessons we can take from there on how we kind of recovered, and if there's a path forward out of this that doesn't.
So
secession.
The right with secession. I mean, both of my parents would have been alive. They would have been kids, but they would have been alive. But so I don't know.
Same for mine. My dad would have been 4, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it feels worse now because we know it's louder.
It is louder.
It's louder. I mean, you didn't have the 24/7 news cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have social media. Well,
if you look at the big, I guess the big dividing issue of the 60s would have been civil rights and then segregation, right? So
there was a lot of female rights going on.
There was a lot of a lot of sex stuff, sex rights stuff. But if you look at post, after the fact, what happened with that? I mean, obviously things have died down to where people aren't. It's not as segregated. But what ended up happening is you do have neighborhoods. It's just black neighborhoods and black churches and white neighborhoods and white churches, and so it's still segregated, even though it's not deliberately, like it's not enforced. It just happened naturally because of all of the, I guess, the ill will during the time, and again, you don't want to live in a place where you don't feel wanted, so you end up in separate areas, right? So that's probably not encouraging, but that seems to be what happened, right?
So what if this is just a natural cycle of a society where, because if you look back on our times of unrest, at least socially, political unrest, it's almost like people turned a flashlight onto dark corners and things that were happening in the shadows came forward.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, it's like people in the 90s were so outrageously upset about the teen pregnancy rate, right? And the teen pregnancy rate really didn't go up all that much. It was just more kind of in your face than it was before.
Yeah.
So I wonder if some of that's not happening. I do think what makes where we're at a little worse right now is the generations. Like, and I don't mean just the generations. I mean the way that our demographics are kind of hitting in the generations. That certain generations have a lot more people in them than others, and they're coming at things from a different viewpoint, and so they're screaming at each other, right? And
Okay, boomer.
well, I mean, yeah, I'm not a boomer. I'm not that old,
I
y'all.
wouldn't mean. I was just saying it. That's one of the taglines that people
Yeah,
say. Mhm.
but I mean, honestly, they look at it. I think that, I mean, I can get my grandparents. They're struggling financially. They've all of a sudden, because they lost a ton of money when the
Mhm.
stock market crashed. And they're afraid. I
Yeah.
mean, they're scared. And I
I
think
think.
some of us that aren't to that point don't understand some of that
Yeah. I
fear.
I
think.
like the idea of cycles too. I've heard that before, and that's kind of what I was going to bring up. Is that some people say like it just kind of peters out and people focus on something else. That Americans have, well, every country has kind of cycles like that in their theory, but there's a certain amount of time, and we get focused on something, and then we get focused on something else. And I guess that's my hopeful theory, is that we'll get focused on it's some kind of pop culture thing or something becomes more interesting, and the whole Twitter and Facebook fights become less interesting, and we'll find something else. I do think, like you mentioned, that there's some downsides this time. Like the social media has to be contributing a lot to it, and the whole sorting thing we mentioned earlier, and then the whole like if we're focused more on politics as a religion, that may make it harder to focus on something else. But
To
I am hopeful we just get tired of it.
our desire to be right has really heightened over the last 10 years. I dipped down. I know I should have done this. I dipped down into the comments of an article, and I'm just always
I meant to bring
curious.
that up.
Yeah, I'm always just curious to see what people are saying, right? Like, I want to hear what opposing people's arguments are, because I think we have to, because there's truth usually in most arguments, and we need to be aware of that. So I dipped down in there, and what I've started doing is on people who just like keep popping up. I've been going and seeing like, who are these people? And they're not even real people. Like, they're fake profiles half the time.
Mhm.
And we're letting these people get us all riled up. And I'm like, come on. Like, but after hearing some of these statistics, I think we've forgotten how to engage our brains. I mean, I think we've become so emotional and reactive
Yep.
that we have forgotten what it is like to think about something.
Yeah. I think politics is just full of emotion now, and there isn't a lot of logical thinking. There isn't a lot of, compromise. There's no compromise. But and I think the far wings of the parties have become so fundamental. Even the non-religious are so fundamental now that there's just no way to compromise. There's one side has to win and one side has to lose, and that only lasts so long until it leads to war. I mean, that's just what's going to happen, and that's what I pray doesn't happen. And
Yeah. I do think religion acts as a guard, and that same dispatch article I mentioned, I thought it had a good stat, and he didn't even make this point, but I think it is a true point. It said 30% of Republicans believe that things have gotten so far off track that true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save the country. And that was of all Republicans, so 30%. And then the highest, and they did religious subgroup breakdowns after that, and the highest religious subgroup that agreed with that was evangelicals, and it was only 26%. So even the highest religious subgroup is not as high as Republicans overall. So that means that non-religious people are believing that we need to get to violence a lot more. So I feel like that shows that people are putting that religious significance into their politics. It makes you become more extreme. It makes you see your enemies as way more of a threat. So, but yeah, I like that point too.
Yep.
I think when you're living out faith, when you're living faith together, and I think you realize that you can't demonize people who think differently from you. We had we served a community meal last night, and I was looking around, and we had a huge turnout for volunteers. And as people's pastors, I usually know kind of where their political leanings are. They may not know each other's, but I usually know them. And I was sitting there watching folks who are on complete opposite ends of the spectrum on tons of issues. They had a common goal. They live life together, and they give each other grace, but it's because we know each other. When we're in relationship with people, we give people grace. We listen to what they say because we've had shared experiences with them. And even if we totally disagree with them, we listen to them.
Yep.
That's what we're missing as a society nowadays, because we're getting all of our news and all of our arguments from people behind a screen. And so we don't filter it. We say whatever the heck we want to say, without knowing that person and remembering that is a true, most of the time, there are those fake, stupid profiles that get us all riled up. But, there are people behind that. And, they're real human beings with real feelings and real life experiences and shared experiences with us. So
I think that one of the problems there is going back to what Bowling said. When we elevate our politics, our political beliefs to the level of a religious belief, then we allow that to end relationships.
So, we've had people leave the church because somebody in the church has such a differing view, or they've gotten into an argument on social media or whatever. If you leave a faith community that is diverse, I'm not saying because you can't get over a small group of people's politics, that's your problem. That's a faith problem.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where as long as the faith community is accepting of you, they're not targeting you. They're not targeting your beliefs, but you are just so offended that these people have these political beliefs that you don't agree with. Then you move on. Well, you got a problem.
Especially if you're doing the same thing just from a different perspective.
Right.
Which is what's happening a lot. And I think that's why you're seeing polarizing faith communities.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you right now in this area, there are several faith communities that I would not walk through the door of because of the rhetoric that I see coming from a lot of people from that particular faith community.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
And I will say from my journey over the past 10 years or so, good luck finding a faith community that is, totally accepting of being an open voting Democrat. Good luck.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard.
It took me a while.
Yeah. And I think that feathers, the people flock together, right? I mean, you're going to do that.
But
so
it's, obviously we should be in prayer for our country. Like, we are so divided, and we needed to figure out a way to just be in relationship with each other again. I think that would help.
Let me challenge that statement. We need to pray for our country. Because here's what I think most people think when they hear that. They pray that the country comes to their way of thinking.
That's a good point.
Yep.
So I think that the difference here is we need to pray that we become peacemakers.
Yes.
The prayer needs to be about us, not about everybody else.
Yep.
But about us. And
absolutely.
So I have an issue.
We don't want to pray like the Pharisee.
Yep.
Thank God that I'm not like all those other
people.
people.
Yeah. And that's my biggest issue with the phrase, let us pray for our country. Because 99% of the time,
it's about
people are praying that other people come to their way of thinking.
That's a very good point.
The Christian bless your heart.
Yes. Yes. So for anybody who disagrees with me, my email is brooke@grayumc.org. Send it on.
If you disagree with me, my email is justinstacy at
well, that's not my email, so go ahead and send it.
It's like praying for your enemies. That doesn't mean pray that ill comes to them. Pray for blessings for them. Pray for them to come to know God. Pray, don't pray that they die, or that's not praying for them. That's praying about
there
them.
was a country song a few years ago called "I'll Pray for You."
Yes.
Anybody remember that? Yes.
Yes.
It's
I'll
like,
pray
I
you
pray
get
your
a flat
car runs out.
tire.
Yeah.
No,
Runs out
I
of
mean-
gas that you wreck, and that's what some people really approach it that way. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's a really good point, Brooke. I like that.
I like that too. And that's a good point to end on. So this was
All right, Maloney. I took Stacy on. I disagreed with him. I get a credit.
Did we disagree at all? I don't recall
know.
disagree.
I called you out on a phrase. How's
Yeah.
that?
You did. Yeah, this was a discussion, disappointing discussion, but a discussion needed to be had.
So this is a discussion where I'm so thankful that my identity is not wrapped up in politics.
Hmm.
I mean, I leave these conversations thinking I am so glad that my allegiance is to the kingdom of God, that my identity doesn't come with what political party won or lost this week. Although, can I just say thank you for maybe the text messages will stop. I mean, I don't even live in Virginia anymore, and I was getting
You were
inundated.
yeah.
But
I
come
got
out
so
of-
many text messages this election.
Oh,
I have never
it
had
was-
that many.
It was awful. But I come away from these conversations thankful that I know where my hope is. I know that God is still in the business of redeeming this world, even when it feels like we're going to hell in a handbasket. That's the hope that we have. So not all is lost for followers of Christ.
Amen. Peace be to
Amen.
you, and have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.